Welcome to the God is the Issue podcast with Brad Bright. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg. Think about it. Our view of God determines what we think on all moral, cultural, and even economic issues. It determines how we vote. Hope for the future of our country and our world lies in our ability to make God the issue in every issue. Climate change. It's highly divisive, and it's a highly divisive topic in our culture, including even among Christians. On one side, you have the doomsday folks who try to scare everyone to death. On the other side, you have the climate deniers who don't even believe there's a problem at all. In the middle, you have a ton of folks who don't know what to think. They don't even know what the truth is. Today, we're going to go where even angels fear to tread, although I'm not sure about that, but people who are really nice people. We're going to have an honest conversation about climate change. And then we're going to take it to the next step and talk about how to make sure God is relevant to the conversation, because that's what we do in every podcast. We make God the issue in every issue. And we're going to bring in our resident expert on making God the issue in every issue, Brad Bright. Brad, thanks for being with us today to talk about climate change.
Great to be here with you. Yeah, I'm glad you said resident expert on making God the issue, not on climate change, because I've studied it, but I'm learning like everybody else.
So what's your opinion on climate change, Brad?
Well, here's my core opinion. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth and climate change. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth and climate change. I believe in climate change. It's not just settled science, but God created it. However, let me make it clear. I'm agnostic on man-made global warming. You know, Greenland is called Greenland for a reason, because 1,000 years ago, people farmed there. You can't farm there anymore today. The Delaware River was crossed by George Washington.
Why can't you farm there? Why can't you farm in Greenland?
There's not a long enough growing season now. It's too cold there now. Whereas there used to be a long growing season, now there's not. You know, and then the Delaware River, when George Washington was around, was covered with chunks of ice, right? Now we don't see much of that anymore. We know volcanoes and meteors can severely affect the global climate patterns. Science tells us there was an ice age, right? Bible tells us there was a global flood. You know, and science has demonstrated that that the Earth's orbit around the sun is elliptical, and that creates long-term heating and cooling patterns that has about a 15-degree range over a long period of time. So we know climate change is real. The Earth warms up, the Earth cools down, glaciers grow, great glaciers sink. Climate change is as old as the planet. It's real. God created it. The Earth has changed before. It'll change again. Climate change is real.
So you're saying you believe in climate change?
Oh, of course. The real conversation is not climate change. As Obama said, climate change is settled science, and I completely agree. Now, I want you to notice something, what Obama did not say. He never said that man-made global warming is settled science. You never heard him say that. You know why? He knew better than to say that. Smart politicians choose their words very carefully. Climate change is settled science. The real debate is about whether or not the planet is currently warming up or not. I mean, is there a warming trend or not? That's the point of contention, not climate change, is whether or not there is man-made global warming going on. Every child knows that the climate changes.
Yeah, climate change. And even in our lifetimes, we've heard so much about climate change because it has changed. All right, that's the great distinction. Why do they call it climate change rather than man-made global warming?
Well, you know, I was in politics. It's just simply another rhetorical trick. It's called spin. Look, you look stupid to the average person if you deny climate change, because everybody knows that it's real, right? Everyone knows it. We learned in grade school that there was an ice age. We learned in the Bible there was a global flood. You can't credibly argue that climate change isn't real. You know, so what they have done is they have framed the message so that if you believe in climate change, you also believe in man-made global warming. It's really quite shrewd what they've done. Framing it that way allows them to take the perceived moral high ground as defenders of the earth. And folks like me who are really agnostic on the issue have been foolish enough to really play along and use their words rather than really shrewdly reframing the conversation. Think of it this way. The average person thinks of it this way. Look, thinks, I know there was an ice age. I learned that in grade school. So I know climate change is real. Therefore, people who argue against climate change must be really stupid because we know it's real. So never argue against climate change. It does make you look stupid. Always reframe it as man-made global warming because that's what the debate is really about.
That's great advice because those conversations, it's so true. And I have found myself even being stuck in that kind of an argument where I'm thinking climate change, because that's what they mean. They don't mean climate change when they say climate change. They mean man-made global warming. So I would say, well, I don't believe in climate change. But what I really is saying is I do believe in climate change because I remember as a kid, Brad, that they were saying we're heading into a new ice age. Things were getting colder. And now they're saying things are getting hotter. So what is it? Well, yes, it is. But I struggle with this man-made global warming. That's something we need to take a break. When we come back, I want to dig deeper in this. And of course, we've got to make God the issue in this. I can't wait to see how you make God the issue in this issue when we talk about climate change. You're listening to the God is the Issue podcast with Brad Bright, and we'll be right back.
Want to know more about how you can make God the issue in every issue? Get your copy of Brad's book, God is the Issue. Now in its third edition, you can get your ebook copy at brightmedia.org. Even better, if you subscribe to this podcast, you'll receive a coupon for one free download of God is the Issue ebook. Go to brightmedia.org, that's brightmedia.org, and get God is the Issue ebook today.
Welcome back to the God is the Issue podcast with Brad Bright. I'm Jim Brangenberg, and we're having a conversation today about climate change. Brad, you said you believe in climate change, but you said you're agnostic on man-made global warming. What do you mean by that? What's the distinction here?
Here's the reality. When I was younger, what was the big scare? The big scare was global cooling. I remember the cover of Time magazine entitled "The Big Freeze." Here's the interesting thing: as you go back and read the rhetoric, it is exactly the same as the rhetoric today. Only they substitute global warming for global cooling, and then they substituted climate change for global warming. It's climate change conversation today. It's kind of same song, third verse. Heard it before. Having said that, though, Jim, initially I believed all the global warming rhetoric. It wasn't something I spent a lot of time thinking about. But here's what happened. 2 words: Al Gore. Al Gore happened. He said one thing, but clearly believed another. While he was talking about melting icebergs, what was he doing? He was flying around in his private jet. He made money investing in oil. His house consumed as much energy in a month as mine did in a year, and it still does. It was clear he didn't believe his own rhetoric, and because when you believe something, you change your behavior to reflect it. His behavior didn't change, so I began asking hard questions. But you know what? I couldn't find any conclusive answers out there, and so I became agnostic on man-made global warming. It was impossible to either confirm or deny or disprove it, to disprove the position due to the lack of information.
And there's so much information, and it's hard to find scientists that will weigh there's just so much there. All right, so Al Gore, in his book, The Inconvenient Truth, he helped lead the charge for global warming. I remember it. But you're saying Al Gore, who had helped lead the charge of global warming, converted you from a believer in climate change to an agnostic on man-made global warming.
Yeah, it's because actions speak louder than words. And I saw his actions and I realized I don't think he really believes his own words. And so I dug into it because of that. Yeah.
What conclusions did you reach personally as a result of your own research about man-made global warming?
Well, here's the 3 things I think I've really been able to say. These are the 3 things I know are true. And the first one is that the planet is in a long-term global warming trend caused by our elliptical orbit, or the Earth around the sun. I mean, it's scientifically verified cyclical process of heating and cooling over a long period of time, and we appear to be near the top of that cycle. Even Al Gore has admitted this, so I don't think anybody really disputes that. Secondly, I've come to the conclusion that the climate science data really is incomplete. Although a lot of the models are helpful for better understanding nature and the planet we live on. They're not accurate as of today. So you really can't put a lot of stock into them in terms of does climate change really exist? I mean, climate change, does man-made global warming really exist or not? Therefore, no one really can say on either side of the debate that it is true or it's not true because there's just not enough data.
Well, and let's just hang there for just a second, because this is something I think about all the time. According to historical patterns, the temperatures are up. But here's the deal. Historical patterns don't go back 6,000, 7,000 years. They go back to the mid-1800s. That's when they started actually taking some temperatures, the 1800s. They don't even have 200 years of data to compare to what they say is a planet that is billions and billions of years old. They're comparing the patterns. I mean, tell me, am I right or am I wrong? I mean, because to me, it seems illogical. They're saying, based on history, we're burning up. But they only look at 200 years of history instead of 6,000 years.
You do have that data, but, like with the orbit of the Earth around the sun, they can extrapolate back in time, I mean, almost forever to the beginning of time of where was the planet and what was going on, all this sort of time. So they can ascertain a lot. However, the models out there, current models, don't accurately predict what's going to happen in the future. The one model we do have is of the elliptical nature of the Earth around the sun, and that causes about a 15-degree shift in the global temperature over extended periods of time. Based on astronomy, all these things, we do know the connection there, as well as we're going to know it. But a lot of these other things, the data just doesn't exist. Not enough data. They're still doing work and they're learning.
What about CO2?
Well, that's another big issue in this thing. There is an implied causality, of a link between CO2, that is carbon dioxide, and the rise of the temperature around the globe. Now then, it's misleading because although there is a correlation, there is clearly a correlation between rise in temperature and rise in CO2. But as you really study it, there's strong evidence, very strong evidence, that the rise in carbon dioxide follows the rise of temperature. It doesn't precede it, it follows it. If that is the case, then the rise in carbon dioxide cannot be what's causing the rise in temperature. So these are really the three things I know with a pretty high degree of certainty. And so as far as I'm concerned, I'm agnostic on global warming because I can't tell anything with certainty on this. And so I'm open to being convinced. I really am. If someone can show me hard data and show me a working model.
All right. So you believe the planet is warming due to the Earth's elliptical orbit around the sun, that climate science data is incomplete, and carbon dioxide is increasing the atmosphere, but is not the cause of rising global temperatures, but a reaction to rising global temperatures.
The best I can tell, yes, that's correct. There's one other thing, though, and I think we need to talk about it, and I know some people probably won't like me for it, but there are doomsday folks out there who play on people's fears. And what I learned firsthand in politics is those people have always been there and always will be there, because what politicians know is that if they can scare you, they can control you. Did you catch that? They know that if they can scare you, they can control you because fear short circuits the logic process. As P.T. Barnum said, there's two types of people out there. Two types of people in the world, con men and suckers. Thank God for the suckers. Frankly, folks, I'm not willing to be a sucker. I want to see the data.
If they can get you to respond in fear, they can control you. And we have seen that just recently in the COVID pandemic. Absolutely.
And politicians are good at it.
You're listening to the God is the Issue podcast as we talk about climate change. Is it real? And Brad Bright says God created climate change. So we come back. We're going to continue in this conversation. You listen to the God is the Issue podcast. We'll be right back.
Brad Bright travels the country speaking and training people how to make God the issue in every issue. Go to brightmedia.org, that's brightmedia.org, to find out how you can bring Brad's highly interactive workshop to your area. It's fun, engaging, and most important, It will help make you more effective in making God the issue in every issue. Go to brightmedia.org, that's brightmedia.org, and schedule Brad today.
Welcome back to the God is the Issue podcast with Brad Bright as we talk about climate change and the fact that Brad Bright is saying right here on this podcast that God made climate change. Brad, if the data's not there to support man-made global warming, that narrative that they keep pushing on us, the rhetoric that we hear all the time, why do people buy into it?
Well, apart from scientists themselves, who wrangle back and forth on this issue, I think there are basically four types of people who really have bought into the global warming narrative. And the first group is folks who believe it because someone they respect told them it's true. I get that. None of us can be experts on everything. We all have to rely on other people to give us good information. And so we say, who do I think knows what they're talking about? And I'm going to go with their opinion, right? That's perfectly legitimate. I get that. That's the first group. The second group are people who believe it's true because they've been told over and over and over and over again that it is true. I used to be one of those. Heard it so much, it's just kind of assumed it was true. But, and I get that. You hear it so much, you start believing it. But there is a third and fourth group. The third group is those who use it to build their power base. And the fourth is those who use it to get rich and famous. We're going to talk more about those a little later.
Well, really, and that's what Brad is laying up for. We just got so much to cover. We're going to do next week's podcast on God created climate change as well, part 2. We're going to talk about who these four groups are in detail and then really finish up making God the issue in this issue because if God made climate change, and Brad has laid it up that God did make climate change, it's part of how God created the planet to have an elliptical orbit around the sun, then we've got to have a response when people are trying to use this rhetoric in order to control us and control our economy and so many other things. Brad Bright, thanks for bringing this conversation to the forefront, and thanks for laying it up. Can you give us just a little sneak peek into next week's podcast? Is there really any hope in this situation?
Oh, there's tremendous hope. As a follower of Jesus, I put a lot of stock in what the Bible says, and there are several verses of the Bible that directly relate to this issue. Also, I think there are things that we can do to be better stewards of the earth, whatever side we're of the debate we're on of this. But I assure you that none of them involve hurting the poor or inflicting pain on the poor, because the poor are very important to the heart of God.
And it's not just inflicting pain on the poor. This is the poor, the middle class. It's everybody. That's what this is. There's just so much of that. Brad Bright, thanks for bringing it to us. I look forward to next week's conversation.
Look forward to it, Jim.
You've been listening to the God is the Issue podcast with Brad Bright. Remember to check us out online, brightmedia.org, brightmedia.org. Remember, in having conversations, especially about climate change and man-made global warming, remember, always be kind, compassionate, and shrewd, because that's how Jesus handled every conversation. But you're going to do this while making God the issue in every issue.